Chicago. Rise and shine. It's the Wake Up Show, where every sunrise is a call to action. Powered by the Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce, we are the champions of change, advocating for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the world of corporate and government contracting. It's not just a show, it's a movement. So get ready for another dynamic journey as we wake up the world to a new era of opportunities and empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, President Larry Ives.
Hey, welcome to the Wake Up Show, Chicago. My name is Dr. Larry Ivory. I'm President and CEO of the Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce and Chairman of the Board of the National Black Chamber of Commerce. Hey, we're gonna get right down to business, but let me first, before we get down to business, let me introduce my multi-talented co-host, LaDonna Ray.
Hey, good morning, Chicago. It's LaDonna Ray. I appreciate every single one of you rocking with us each and every Saturday. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, share the show, and you can comment in each of these shows as you see fit. We will be reading those, but we are powered by the Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce, and we are sponsored by Wind Creek Chicago Southland. If you want to go to our website, it's ilbcc.org. You can go there to be a member, get more information about the Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce. And of course, we'd love to hear from you about volunteering. Now, just so you know, the Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce exists to strengthen and advocate for elevate, or should I say, to elevate Black owned businesses. We connect entrepreneurs to capital contracts, certifications, policy updates, and real opportunities. And we keep the fight going. And I also want to go ahead and take this time to introduce our other host, guest host, that is going to help us navigate a powerful conversation, human rights consultant, creative force, and global thinker. I'll go ahead and put that in there this week, Larry. Lorenzo T. Hughes.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wake Up Show, Chicago.
All right. Larry, do you want Lorenzo to still do his piece and then we go into our run of show?
No, let's go ahead and do. We're going to come back to his piece and do it for the next show. But let's go ahead and get started in terms of the time frame that we got. So let's go ahead and introduce Dr. Jeffrey Sterling, and then we'll keep on rolling from there. And then if we get to the end, we may have Lorenzo do that piece, depending on how the show goes. We're going
Awesome.
to do
Well,
two today.
today we have a dynamic force behind the healthcare industry, owner and founder of SIMPCO Solutions, Dr. Jeffrey Sterling. Welcome to the Wake Up Show.
Good morning, everybody.
Good
Good
morning.
Good
morning.
morning, Dr. Sterling. Hey, we are excited to have you on. We've been talking about you coming back on the show because you always bring some incredible insight when it comes to, understanding healthcare, but also not just understanding healthcare and how healthcare works, but the business of healthcare. So, we're excited. You're doing some incredible stuff on a global basis. So, take us where you want to go at this point in time in terms of what's happening with Simcoe, what you're doing, what you want to convey to our audience at this point.
Well, actually, I want to flip it because the conversation that we had indeed is an intersection between the healthcare industry, which is, of course, as you've heard me say many times, over 20% of the gross domestic product in the United States, totaling over $5 trillion a year in the exchange of commerce here. But this is an amazing intersection between what the chamber has been doing in Africa and where additional opportunities exist. So this conversation really, I just want the audience to kind of think outside the box and not focus so much on healthcare as a system, but the industry and particularly opportunities that may exist on the motherland. Because here's a newsflash for you guys. Africa actually has four of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, and that ranges from finance, infrastructure, AI, technology, real estate. It has the youngest demographic in the world. And by the way, in case you didn't know, by 2050, 40% of the entire world's youth will be in Africa. So it's about time that we stop thinking about Africa as a developing nation or an emerging market and start thinking about it as a booming economy. Just to give you one example, if you actually go up to Nigeria and think about what's happening there, they are on track by 2050 to become the world's third largest economy with a total gross domestic product of $15 trillion. So that's huge for us. We built America, and a lot of the thoughts that I've had over the last year were stimulated, believe it or not, by something that President Trump had to say. And as he, in his way, went about labeling so many African nations as S-hole countries and
Mhm.
saying that people such as Somalians need to go back there and fix their own country, it actually sparked an entrepreneurial tick in my brain to say, yeah, African Americans really would do well to become engaged on the continent, because it's pretty clear that if there's business to be conducted, and I remind everybody that the chamber has been a true leader in exploring those opportunities. But if there's going to be American led business over on the motherland, on that continent, it probably is going to be African Americans leading the way. So it's time to start having that conversation, to think through that prism. And certainly in my space, as Larry knows, even before we started participating 10 years ago on many things that have happened domestically, I was pretty heavily doing things there in other parts of the world. So what I want to do is kind of run out some of what I'm doing and hopefully show that as a template for others who may be inclined to do business over in Africa, because there's so much to be.
Dr. Shirley, hey, I'm going to interrupt your flow because
done.
when you said 15 trillion, and I really try to follow what's happening in Africa, but you're saying that Nigeria will have a $15 trillion economy, and we're only have a $32 trillion economy. So 15 trillion, that's pretty impressive.
Well, I mean, once again, if you think about how many people live on the continent, it is truly stupendous that the continent has been held down for as long as it has. You know better than anybody, Larry, that the mineral resources are so plentiful, but there's everything else on that continent. And the country really is getting over the notion of requiring charity to live its lives and to conduct its business. And they're starting in earnest to look inward and to do for themselves. And just think about some of the countries. You have Nigeria, you have South Africa, you have Kenya. There's over 55 nations over there, but some of them are doing quite well. And with an entire continent to grow and expand to, there's a matter of time before the continent becomes fully developed. And we're at a point in time now where we're seeing that more than perhaps at any point in time in history. So if you want to do business, that's a hell of a place to be thinking about doing business.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the things we've been trying to convey to for quite some time is that, as we take a look what's happening in America, and we ought not to dismiss America and its economy, but we also ought to explore what I consider to be the economies that's really going to expand at a far greater rate. And Africa is that place. And for us not to be engaged and involved in that is just a strategic mistake. So I'm excited to be engaged in that. But let you go back to what you were saying. I don't know if LaDonna or Lorenzo has any comments before you get into your flow. But you guys, you got anything you want to add into that in terms of what's happening in Africa?
Well, I guess for me, I have just a question because I strongly agree with what's being said as far as being able to get African Americans or inspire African Americans to go to Africa and do business. But I guess where I kind of get caught up is understanding what it is that we should be doing to inspire African Americans to understand or to debunk the barriers such as language barriers and convenience barriers to inspire us to want to do business in Africa or to go visit at least.
Well, that's what strategic partnerships are for. And
Mhm.
there are agents over there, and I think that the visits that the chamber took over there just brilliantly exhibited what that looks like. There are companies that are already over there. There are entrepreneurs that are already over there. There's money that's already over there. What is missing is the special sauce that African Americans bring to the table.
Mhm.
We have the ingenuity that is baked in the cake by us being Americans. We have the cultural sensitivity that is necessary to treat them in a way that they typically have not been treated by either the Chinese, the Indians, or the Americans that have conducted a lot of business over there. There's a family sensibility to it all. I think that if you go over there, if you take any type of trip, and this is a nice seg, if you take any type of trip over there, there's a spirit that will become infused in you, and you will realize home in a way that we still aren't allowed to feel in America. And Larry, to what you said, of course, as we say all the time, it's never an either or conversation. It's a both and. We can do business to the hilt here in the States because this is our home, but this represents a place where perhaps there is no greater opportunity, including here at home, to conduct business. Believe me when I tell you, the conversations over there aren't about BEP spend or pennies on the dollar. There are real opportunities to conduct full business as a prime and in meaningful ways in countries that are longing and desirous of that type of expertise, which we actually have. I never became more of a professional than the first time I left the States and found out that when I conducted business overseas, that I wasn't being viewed as something other than an expert, other than an American, and other than someone who had something serious to offer.
I think about how other countries have come to America, that their citizens have come to America and made our home their home. And their alliance is still with their home countries. But because we have not formed a relationship with Africa or the countries in Africa, we have a disconnect. So the narrative that needs to change to kind of try to reshape our existence when it comes to the relationship building in Africa, and if that narrative does not change, Dr. Sterling and Larry and Lorenzo, then we're always going to feel like that is way too far away for us to even be concerned about spending our money and doing trade relations. How do we get that or strengthen that that narrative? Not to repeat what Lorenzo was asking, but how do we get out of our own way? Because if as a whole we're fighting over 30% here in America. So, how do we jump over the hurdle of building those relationships and
Hmm. Hmm.
understanding what the benefits are? It sounds great, but we need to really do it.
Yeah, and to be confident that we're going to be accepted.
Well, that's an interesting mentality, Lorenzo, and I want to address what you and Ladonna said at the same time. Just think about all the immigrants that come to America with a nickel in their back pocket. They do it. You have to at some point decide that you're going to go for it. You have to immerse yourself, and that's the nature of being an entrepreneur. You got to go for it, and either you are inclined to do it or you aren't. That's the spirit of the entrepreneur. Now you can be smart about it. And me, more than 10 years in the game, I'm here to tell you, even now. I still do not try to do anything over there without taking advantage of the opportunities and the infrastructure that exists for Americans to do business abroad. That means I begin a conversation by talking to the consulate, to the embassy, to the
Mhm.
U.S. attaché. I get a warm introduction from the U.S. ambassador to whatever country in which I'm trying to conduct business. That's a resource that's available to us. I've taken over a half a dozen trips through state agencies that conduct trade missions abroad, Japan and Indonesia and in Africa itself. So there are ways to make sure that you aren't just plopping yourself down in the country, even though
Right.
people successfully do that here. And we just have to be smart about it so that we aren't getting ripped off or putting ourselves in harm's way. But, again, this is not something that's brand new. There's an infrastructure in place. Many people have already taken advantage of it. And that's kind of why I wanted to have the conversation so that we can figure out how to do this in a way that's smart. But believe me when I tell you, when you go over there are going to be people lined up. We've done missions where we had hundreds of people that were lined up to talk to us. And we
Mm.
just, on the medical supply side in particular, where everybody just wanted to do business. They just hadn't seen us, hadn't had an opportunity to do business with us. And it's great. It really is a real opportunity if you're an entrepreneur.
I love it.
So let me ask this question really quick. I'm sorry, Ladonna. We have a media committee, right? Or something.
Yes, it's part of
Yes.
yes.
So understanding that we have a media committee and an entertainment committee, how are we not seeing these relationships when Larry and yourself make these trips to Africa and are developing these relationships? Because that's the power of media, is its ability to influence and inform. If we're not seeing that, what you're talking about over here, it's kind of hard for us to picture it or fathom a level of success if we're not seeing that success advertised to us. Because like I said, that's the power of influence in media. So what can we start doing to influence this movement?
Well, actually, I would respectfully suggest that Larry Ivory has been doing exactly that. If it's up to somebody like me on the business side, some people like conducting business below the radar. Some people don't like telling you everything there's doing because somebody else will try to swoop in and scoop it up or compete or otherwise undercut what it is you're trying to doing. But the chamber, to its credit, it's not only been phenomenal in on the media side, it's been astronomical in providing opportunities. So if you had gone on any one of those trips and seen just how vast the opportunities were, yes, it then becomes incumbent on the media committee when we come back. And some of this has been done to put together reels and advertise it on the website and have special shows this on this platform and others to really talk about the successes that have occurred. But this conversation today is an example of exactly what you're asking about. And as we get additionally into the conversation, we'll talk about how my current efforts actually are a specific offshoot of a chamber trip. So there you go.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, let's move
So
on.
we're gonna let you roll, man, and we'll chime in when we need to. But go ahead and take us there.
So Larry, one of the things we've talked about for what 10 or 15 years now is that a special onus on our community is finding ways to do well by doing good. And that there's no greater truth in that than in healthcare, because at the same time, healthcare is always about service. It's about saving lives. It's about extending the quality of life as well as its longevity. But the reality in the United States is that it is America's largest economic sector. It's an industry. And that's something that some places in Africa have figured out, most notably South Africa and Kenya. They're real big on medical tourism because historically everybody in Africa was either going north to Egypt or elsewhere to India to get their care. But huge medical tourism industries have grown up in South Africa, Kenya, and a few other places. So they're starting to get it that you can make tons of money. I will actually go back to when the pandemic hit and Africa was just absolutely devastated because of the supply chain. They were not able to get any medications. They weren't able to get any medical supplies. As a matter of fact, I'm here to tell you the specific way in which SI Medical Supply, one of my companies, was formed, was because while I was over in Kenya during the pandemic, doing stuff there, they specifically said, "Can you help us with this? Can you help us because we are last on everybody's list in terms of getting stuff going?" There are no pharmaceutical manufacturing plants over there. There's a huge effort continent wide to do such a thing, but it doesn't exist. So that means they can't get essential medications. They have relied historically on charity to get medical supplies over there. But with the shuttering of USAIDs, that's all gone away. So now there are opportunities to build medical, pharmaceutical, surgical, and personal protective equipment supply companies over there. And Larry, as you know, we love Zimbabwe, and they specifically asked us to do just that. So what I've taken upon now is, and again, there's an analogy for anyone that would think about how to conduct business in Africa and what I'm about to get into. I want to do well. And I just randomly one day was having a conversation with my favorite AI platform and just got into who's helping Africa. And one of the things that I noticed, just to give you one example in one country, in Zimbabwe, there have been a total of 2 medical missions that have ever gone on over there. One was from India, and they had about 10 people go over, and another was from America, and Tim Tebow was trying, and they took maybe 10 people over there. So there's never been an African American led medical mission over to that particular country, and this is true for most of the rest of the places over there. They've been medical missions, but there hasn't been African American leadership in doing that. So I got her to asking around to some of my colleagues and others about why hasn't this been done? And typically the response I got in some examples were, well, we were kind of waiting for you to do it. We figured if it was going to get done, then that would probably be something
Everybody's waiting on everybody.
everybody's waiting on everybody. So what SIMPCO has now put in place is a mechanism by which we're talking to Ethiopia, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Nigeria, South Sudan, and we're going to become that entity. And on a September and March schedule, we're going to be taking between 50 and 100 people, dentists, pharmacists, nurses, support staff. We have a team of psychiatrists that are involved in global health ready to go. And we're in public health professionals to have those conversations as well. But we're going to become a presence on the African continent through the delivery of episodic medical missions. Each of our missions will be the largest that's ever occurred from either an American group, and in many instances will be the first ever done by an African American group. So that's the doing good. The doing well from the business side of the conversation, because this is a double-sided coin, is that while are over there, of course we'll be meeting with the ministry, of course we'll be connecting with community organizations, of course we'll be communicating with entrepreneurs and seeking out opportunities to expand our reach on the business side. We already talked extensively with several nations that I won't mention over there in terms of putting SIMPCO health and human service facilities across their continents as part of their developing universal health care plans. So, once again, there are people who can go over there and find creative ways to engage the countries and do well and still take advantage of the opportunity to get a reputation, to conduct business, to network with existing businesses, to find agents that can work on our behalf. You got to remember, folks, and this goes back to what Lorenzo was asking earlier. I've never seen Sam Walton behind a registry at any Walmarts anywhere. But you outsource, you get strategic partners, you fund entrepreneurial endeavors, and then you grow. With the market emerging and booming in the way in which it is in Africa right about now, it's a hell of a time for us to pursue that strategy. And I think that there are ramifications in this particular type of model for many different Black businesses in all different types of sectors. And it also means something pretty important for the Chamber's efforts locally and abroad, because we would hope that we could partner and be accompanied on the business side of these conversations by the ongoing representation of the Illinois State and National Black Chambers of Commerce.
I'd like for Larry
Dr.
to
Sterling.
speak to how those businesses can get better prepared to join in on the mission rather than be afraid to take part in it altogether. Larry, I know we are capable of um, assisting companies in getting ready to go onto those missions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a part of our agenda has always been to think globally, and like Doctor said, do good and do well. We are always prepared to identify companies and partnerships, just like we were before we had the um, problem where we had 18 African CEOs from Zimbabwe to come to our conference, and then all of a sudden,
Hmm.
under the Trump administration, shut it down. Those individuals were coming to make a connection with us and get connected so people would know the industry, the opportunities, and begin to build relationships. And that's really what we wanted to do when we brought it, when we were intending to bring them before that began to change. It's an easy process in terms of, because we've been doing this for a long time. If you're interested, you talk to us. If you got an industry, AI, healthcare, whatever the case may be, you can actually get connected with us and get prepared to have conversation before you get there. And by the time you get there, you've already, in some cases, already begin to structure a deal. But I got another question real quick, Dr. Sterling. You and I were just talking about, because I know we got some callers here waiting to talk to us, but you and I were just talking about, we talk about rare earth when it comes to Africa. And that's important, and America is losing the fight with China. But we had an article that came out about health where they were getting information, medical information from. Give us, walk us through kind of what that conversation was and why that was so important. Because you gave me a different perspective on that.
Which part of it are you talking about?
That you remember when we had a conversation about America offering Africa,
Oh,
Zimbabwe,
sure.
$374 million, somewhere in that number, and they turned it down. And I was like, why did they turn down 374 million? Give us a walkthrough what happened and why that's important.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Everybody has a price, and I'll begin the conversation that way. So the U.S. which has historically provided about 1% of its GDP in charitable efforts globally, actually pulled tens of millions of dollars off the table. It literally shuttered USAID, which was involved in many life saving endeavors, most notably HIV education, prevention, and treatment efforts. So, what is still the number one cause of death on many in many African nations, all of a sudden had the rug put out from under it. And at the same time, the Trump administration actually started using verbiage such as you need to start conducting business and can think about trade instead of always being dependent on charity. Once
Mm.
again, another opportunity for us to say, yeah, let's actually build something instead of being dependent because purse strings create puppet strings. Now, in this particular conversation, and Larry, this has been happening largely under the radar, but the U.S. actually just offered about over $300 million in financial support to Zimbabwe in particular. But there were so many strings attached to it that Zimbabwe said that no, we can't accept money under these terms. So imagine, if you will, and LaDonna, I know you're in tune with this because it's really kind of an AI conversation. They want, and I'm just going to give you a phrase here, Henrietta Lacks. That's what they were trying to pull. So they
Mhm.
wanted to access the healthcare information. They wanted to mine the data for tons of Zimbabwe citizens because, as you know, um, well, this is a medical piece. Give me a second. Let me divert. In the realm of human expression, Africans have the most diversity. The tallest person on earth, the shortest person on earth, the smartest person on earth, the less smart person on earth. The genomes, the expression of the human genomes are most diverse and robust on the African continent. That's not even a subject of debate. Um, Now, in this particular example, the United States wanted to mine the health of um, those citizens, and they wanted to get blood samples, blah blah blah, have access to all types of records, etc. And they were going to mine that for future scientific and discoveries, conduct research, etc. The problem with that deal was, first of all, it was only $300 million, which isn't a lot for what they would have gotten in return. But there was no guarantee that the nation of Zimbabwe and its citizens were ever going to benefit from any of the discoveries that were found. In other words, there wasn't going to be a win-win where they shared in the revenue. They weren't even going to be guaranteed that they would have access to the healthcare innovations that came from those discoveries. So they were put in a position where they had to say no because you basically are coming in here. And by the way, if you have access to someone's DNA, the way genetic engineering and other types of things work, it could be a very sinister set of outcomes if somebody had nefarious intentions. So
Mm.
that's not the way in which you can conduct business with somebody and do it in a way that is honorable. That's not the conversation we're having at all. And this is why we hear every time we go over to Africa, no matter what nation you're going to, people kind of say, yeah, we'd feel a lot better when doing business with Americans if we were doing business with African Americans.
Mm.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
take this money, but adopt our policies, is what the U.S. was saying.
that's right.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, guys, is that I want to put a pin in this is that when it comes to rare earth, they want pennies on a dollar and they want to exploit. The same thing on the healthcare. Africa has become a country that everybody wants to exploit. Same way as it is in America, in our own communities, everybody comes in, exploit, takes our money, uh, and do well by dealing with us while we suffer and continue to struggle. It's the same model when you think about it. What's happening in America and Black communities is the same thing. What's happening in Africa in a different way. More people coming here making money on us than us who are here doing well, creating our own stores, our own everything else. Africa's doing the same thing in some cases. You guys follow where I'm getting to in terms of that?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like a big lack of respect, but we can't keep falling for it either. I like how Africa pushed back and said, yeah, that's a chunk of change, but we're going to stick to our values and principles. And we need to do the same thing here in America,
Dr.
the
Sir, we'll
African
be back.
Americans.
We're going to begin to take a few calls. We got a bunch of calls we want to get in, but Dr. Sir, go ahead, and then we will. Once you get through with your comments, we like to hear from the audience in terms of whatever questions they may have for you at the same time. So if you want to continue, go right ahead.
Yeah,
Well,
if you want to call 773-591-1690, just had to give the number out.
the only other thing I would add before moving to the callers is that I would actually invite people. There are two ways in which this should be done. And if I could say that there was an ideal way to go about it, I would challenge the chamber to continue to do the types of missions over there. We've done Zimbabwe on several occasions. There are many other nations that represent a similar type of opportunity. But I think that aspiring entrepreneurs should become familiar in Illinois with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. They are the place where trade and investment conversations occur. They do finance and business missions around the world, whether you're talking South America, South Korea, literally everywhere. But there are African spaces in which they go as well. So yeah, there's ways that you can get that education, and we can do it in a way that's culturally sensitive and specific through the chamber. But yeah, let me just put a pin on it. And before we finish up, I will give out contact information for people that are interested in the mission or just going over to piggyback on what we're doing.
All right. Ready to move
Rosalie,
on?
want to take a caller here, and then we're going to get back. I got a couple of questions for Dr. Sterling.
All right. Kay, you're live. You're on the Wake Up Show, Chicago. What do you have for us?
Good morning, LaDonna, and everyone else. I listen to you during the week, so I like hearing your voice.
Thank you.
I'm interested in finding out how to do that. I currently am a purchasing manager at one of the hospitals here, and I also recently met a young man that has a courier business. So I texted him so he can listen in on the call. So and I don't have a business, but he does. I guess you're going to let us know, because you just said you're going to let us know later how to get involved. But those sound like good opportunities in the medical field, and also with African Americans, how we don't participate in the studies of these medications because we don't trust the people, and that sounds like Africans don't trust Americans. But maybe we can test products, test medications on Africans, and that way we can get the best results, because these medications that they're testing on white people, they're killing black people. Like the high blood pressure medication and the diabetes medications. So maybe we can, work together where we can, study, like you were saying, the genomes and all that, study on Africans, and that will make the medicine better for us as well. So I'm definitely interested in opportunity.
All right, Kay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who wants to respond to that?
Dr. Sterling, go ahead.
Well, the one part of that I will address is that there's a double-edged sword. Medications that don't work on as well on African Americans isn't necessarily because somebody is intentionally trying to kill you, but because if the research wasn't done on African Americans, then you can't necessarily extrapolate the findings of that result study to African Americans. So sometimes medication is given that had no black representation during the research studies, and then you discover when you apply it to black populations, the side effect profile may be different, the efficacy may be different. That's more of as she said correctly at the end, that's a huge clarion call for blacks to get involved in research trials that are controlled and overseen by African Americans, and the same is certainly true on the continent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there have been some
One of the
unethical
things,
trials. Go ahead, Larry.
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Adana.
There have been some unethical trials that took place in Africa. That one most recent was I believe it was the hepatitis B vaccine.
Hmm.
But I know that we're not speaking on that level of trials. It wouldn't necessarily be with those intent. Am I correct, Dr. Sterling? When she
Yeah,
said use Africans, I didn't.
one of the interesting conversations about this is that my financial planner used to say everybody worries about the pennies on the dollar. I'm more concerned with the dollar. And the analogy in that conversation is that the number of healthcare problems that exist for Africans and even for African Americans, you'd have to go through a list of about 40 or 50 things before you start talking about the ways that side effects hurt us.
Mhm.
Access to healthcare, access to medicines, suffering because we're last on the list in the supply chain, not engaging in health prevention and promotion. There's so many more things that are top tier medical concerns. And in many instances, people are taking, it's kind of like when we take whatever medicine we found on the counter when we get a cold just because we think it's an antibiotic. We do what we have to and we can't do better. We want to be in the business of building an infrastructure so systems can be better, and then function follows appropriate structure.
Yeah.
All right.
It sounds like we got a long way to go. One of the things LaDonna mentioned when she mentioned 30%, and when you go to Africa, you don't have to worry about the 30%. I wish we were getting 30%, even though that's the goal and the law that's in place. We're really getting 2%. And it's always this issue about, it's not about being competent, it's about whether they let you in. And you can go throughout history from immigration to how they treated people from Hades in comparison to Europeans coming into America. There's significant disparity across the board. What we have to begin to do, from my perspective, is begin to take a look at this thing from a non emotional, but from an economic perspective, because America looks at everything from an economic perspective, you know, and we sometimes can get involved from an emotional perspective. And I think you need to have some balance no matter what you do. But I think we really need to understand the economics behind the opportunities. And when you understand that the next real growth opportunity that most economists around the world agree with is Africa, the question is going to be, are we going to sit on the sidelines and let everybody else benefit from Africa? Or are we going to get involved and engaged in helping to shape Africa in a way that is meaningful, that deserving of our brothers and sisters that, because that's our country, that's where we come from. We have to do a better job of making the economic case and why we need to go to Africa, not just for the sake of going to Africa and going to Musatunya or Victoria Falls. We got to go there with the whole attitude of, let's build stadiums, let's bring basketball, let's do all kinds of other things, because you got millions of people who are waiting for an opportunity. And if we go there and bring our money, resources, and partner with the right people, we're going to make a lot of money like everybody else has been doing for quite a number of years, quite frankly.
We have a question online. It says, does your guest have any MOUs with African nations? If so, do they establish exclusively in certain markets?
Yes and yes.
Yes, and yes.
Okay, moving on.
Absolutely. On the national level, we've had struck a number of MOUs with African countries, which has been common. But I don't think we've seen, LaDonna, into the listening audience. I still think there's enormous potential. That's why we're working on a game plan that really focuses on doing trade in Africa. Having our own fundamental trade agreement and doing some other things that we'll talk about at a different show once we lay everything out. But we think that Africa is, quite frankly, like everybody else, it's a great opportunity for us to invest in and grow in. Dr. Sterling.
So, the one thing that I would point out, and I hate having to say this, but I love being able to say this. The success that I've had in the States is very much in large part because of the success I've had globally. And people that apply for grants, and again, I keep coming back to BEP because that's the mechanism in the state of Illinois, but we've always seen these questions, right? It was like, have you ever conducted business? Or how success, the how successful are you questions, which are a catch-22 because you can't be successful until you're successful, and then you don't get contracts, and then you're getting somebody's subcontract opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. Doing business abroad, elsewhere, gave me specifically the cachet to actually be able to say, yes, I've been a prime. Yes, I've done contracts at a certain level. And then even now, that still financially and programmatically empowers me to withstand the rigors, for lack of a better word, of doing business in certain states in the United States, because it requires finances, it requires an infrastructure, and you can't just wait forever to hit a home run before you can start doing business. No, you have to do business, hit the home run, then build upon that. So it's kind of important for people that are entrepreneurs. You have to go to where the low hanging fruit is, and sometimes that's just not going to be where you are. So whether it's looking across the vastness of the United States, on the elsewhere on the American continent, or otherwise around the world, Larry and I certainly have talked about this a lot and agree that despite what you may think, Africa represents some of the greatest opportunities. I won't say easy, but some of the greatest opportunities to conduct business. And after all, if you are in business, that's what you want to do. And I'm not talking about if you have a hobby or a hustle. If you actually want to conduct business, then there are real ways in markets that have huge populations, huge or I should say developing sectors. It's a great time to jump in and get in. And you don't have to look over your shoulder all day, every day, wondering what somebody's going to treat you less than.
I like that. It makes me want to move there. We have
Mhm.
several committees in the Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce. If you go to our website, go to ilbcc.org, and you'll see under the menu, you'll see Explore, and there will be a section for committees. You'll see the different committees that we have with the chamber that you can join. And it looks like those are some of the industries that we can explore in on African soil, correct?
Absolutely,
Mm,
absolutely, Donald.
okay.
Well, one of the things I go back to again, guys, is that you know, Dr. Shirley made the comment in reference to going and getting some experience from someplace else than what you're currently at. Illinois is not the easiest place to do business um, for African Americans. There's some challenges that we've talked about on the air a number of different times, and we have seen some progress, but not enough progress in terms of opening more doors and more opportunities. I'm aware of the fact, Dr. Sterling, that you have invested an enormous amount of time and energy to really kind of help Illinois to be on the cutting edge of healthcare. And we're allocated some resources by which to do that, but somehow that never happened. And we're still fighting for the very thing people agreed upon to fulfill the promise, no different than the promise to Harry Lennox in terms of what he was working on. And so we still got some inherent challenges when it comes to just the execution and follow through when people make commitments to us.
Mm,
Well, I mean, say it with your chest. I mean, let's be full throated in that assertion. At this point, a chapter of my memoir is going to be the state of Illinois owes me $300 million.
thank you.
Imagine, if you will, the literally millions of dollars that had to be spent to go through a process that resulted in an appropriation being approved 4 consecutive years by the General Assembly in the state of Illinois, signed by the governor of the state of Illinois, 4 consecutive years to build a preventive health infrastructure across the state. And then that money does not get released from the agency. Everybody always thinks that the hard work is getting a bill passed. But in our particular example, we have, for no good reason, well, actually, there's some excellent reasons that you might not want to discuss on the air. But as the saying goes, it takes a nation of millions or a state of millions to hold us back. But we've done this. We've promoted excellence. We've engaged in best practices. We've done these things the right way. We come with the appropriate amount of expertise and credibility and have an outcomes based focus that would help the citizens of the state of Illinois. And here we are. It is an incredibly challenging proposition. At every stage of the game. And here we sit, simply waiting, wondering, hoping that someone who represents us in the executive branch or on the legislative branch will ask these questions. But as you point out, my good friend Harry Lennox has a similar circumstance for $26 million. Why are Black businesses being successful in the legislative process, but not at the executive level and having the money for these projects delivered? It's yet another example of why you can't put all your eggs in one basket. It's wonderful, and as much as we love home, if you're conducting business and are an entrepreneur, you need to have the wherewithal not to have such a thing run you out of business, but the dexterity to be able to maneuver and juggle balls here, there, and everywhere else
I
while you.
think about all the efforts that have been put in locally by us as African Americans that could have been spent going globally. But we can't get that back, but we can move forward.
That's
We
right.
only have about 6 minutes left, guys. Where do we go from here?
Well,
Well,
I think where we go from here, LaDonna, is again go back to what Lorenzo said in his comments. what are we doing to make sure that Africa and really conveying to our people that Africa is a place of opportunity, and I think that's we got to continue to do that. That's why it's important to have this show for us to talk about Africa. We've done, I think, a reasonably good job in talking about Africa and the opportunities. I think, but we got to continue to do that, and I think once we understand the model, and I'll go back to when we went to Ghana for the first time, and we met with the president, and we met in the council, and he made this comment to us. He said, a lot of people tell you not to come here, and we were sitting there, the press was there. He said, but ask yourself the question, why are they here? And we paused for a moment. He said, they're here
Mm,
because they're making lots of money. And this was
mm,
back in 1985.
Right.
And we're still trying to convince ourselves of what everybody else have already understood and continue to profit from. We have to move beyond this self doubt because I think it's a part of the strategy overall to keep us in a position of weakness by not understanding the real opportunity. If people can convince us there's no gold in those hills and there is gold, then they did a pretty good job of keeping the resources from us. We have to move beyond the rhetoric and get right down to business, continue to push the agenda, build relationship with Mother Africa, look at pushing economic agendas. When we ask for reparations, we ought to be asking for debt reduction, and we ought to be asking for trade agreements with African Americans because, quite frankly, the Chinese are, when it comes to rare earth, they're kicking our butts in the U.S. But it's a national security issue. That's why America is scrambling, trying to find more opportunities. But again, you want the opportunities to be fair. LaDonna, if I do business with you, you want me to treat you fairly. Now, if I can beat you, which is what they do sometimes, they beat us and we get very little from it. So I'm going to pause for a moment because I know, Dr. Sir, I want you to have some closing comments and any other comments before we get out of here.
Yeah, I never get to say this to you, but bump that last part of what you said. We are, they teach us to be twice as good to get half as far. At some point in time, we look up and say, hey, we actually are twice as good. Let me give you an example. This whole medical supply thing I have going over there. The specific reason why I was invited into the conversation is because the Chinese and the Indians weren't about it. Hard stop. The American brand of quality, customer service, and all the rest of that doesn't exist in the rest of the world. And as I went over there with those values, that represented a huge opportunity that the Chinese, they would sell stuff and you couldn't find them afterwards.
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
And
mhm.
Mm.
obviously, if we come here and say, yes, we have warranties, yes, we have a service facility by which you can get stuff repaired, I've already won. So we don't have to necessarily go into the conversation thinking that we're less than. And and getting back to something I heard LaDonna say a long time ago on a different show, we fear the unknown and we mock what we don't understand. We have a hell of a lot, respectfully, to fear back home than we do in a nation of people that look like us. And we have to
Absolutely.
diffuse ourselves of the nonsense that we've seen on Tell a Vision forever about the level of dis-ease we should have being with our people. We have people everywhere across the diaspora, of course, at home in America, but it's time that we connect and take advantage of business opportunities because this is a business conversation and there's a ton of it out there. And it's about time we got a whole hell of a lot of it, a lot more of it to be sure. So I just want to throw this in because it's coming up against the hour. If you want any more information, and this is going to be a hybrid thing. Yes, we're going there explicitly for a medical mission, and we're going to serve thousands and thousands of people while we are there. But there are going to be some adjacent business opportunities because we certainly are going there intent on addressing both sides of that coin. So if you want additional information, there's going to be an application. We have so many people who want to go. Yes, there will be applications. If you're a doctor, dentist, nurse, or other type of healthcare professional, feel free to let us know that. But if there are other ways that you want to get in and participate, let us know that too. We will be needing assistance, so people will come over for logistics and support staff endeavors as well. Hit us up at medical mission at simcoillinois.com. That's SIMPCO Illinois, ILLINOIS.com. Medical mission, no S at the end of that, at SIMPCOsolution.com. And you're going to be hearing more about this on the show, especially as opportunities specifically present that are adjacent to the mission or concurrent with the mission. And, one thing I'm actually surprised about, what Larry has going on is really going on. When he talked about developing these trade agreements with these other nations, this is a hand in glove proposition. As we do these things, and started off by mentioning a half a dozen different countries, we would expect that in the background, we will be going over there and perhaps getting trade agreements done while we're over there doing these missions, because you lead with an open hand and then you return with that hand hopefully closed with some money around it. So let's see how that works out.
Nice. I have to wrap everybody up. I want to thank you, Dr. Sterling with SIMPCO Solutions. Larry Ivory, thank you for putting me on this platform to do this show with you. And of course, Lorenzo T. Hughes, I'm sorry we didn't get to your presentation, but I do want to remind everyone, Larry, you may have gotten an email that we will not be here next Saturday. There will be live programming of Reverend Jesse Jackson's funeral going on next Saturday. And he too fought for trade missions in Africa.
Absolutely.
So if you're a Black business owner, healthcare professional, entrepreneur, or just in general, you're thinking about going on this mission, don't forget, go to ilbcc.org. Do not just watch the movement, join it, share the show, comment the conversation, subscribe to the Wake Up Show Chicago on YouTube. And this show is powered by Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce and sponsored by Wind Creek, Chicago, Southland. That's it for now. We love you and continue to keep it moving. Bye bye for now.
Five voices break barriers and illuminate the path towards a more inclusive tomorrow. Follow us across the socials at The Wake Up Show Chicago. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. It's The Wake Up Show every Saturday morning at 9, where change begins with every sunrise.
Welcome to the Wake Up Show Chicago.
That's the end?
1690 W.